we have MandaloreGaming's Weird West review. I have no idea what this game is. It's sorta, I just saw this is a semi-recent MandaloreGaming video, and this looked very interesting, so I'm just gonna give it a shot and see what this is. So yeah, let's just get in there. Oh, it's
from the co-founder of Arcane
so it seems like an isometric game.
and other minds that worked on Dishonored and Prey, comes a new company and a new immersive sim game. I've always thought
Okay. I swear to God, there was like an isometric POV, and now it's in first person. What the fuck is going on?
that term was weird and the genre can be hard to define sometimes. Like, oh, you have multiple solutions to problems, and there are RPG elements on occasion. The world has all these systems, so this might count. This is not one, and oh god, does this count? You can't even use the funny number anymore since even Call of Duty got in on that. A lot of people think that it should at least be in first person, on a baseline that puts you in the perspective of someone in the setting. So Alien Isolation counts, but not later Hitman games. The point is, people will argue back and forth over what stupid shit defines a genre until the end of time. Now we have Weird West, made by developers who created classic examples of the genre, being advertised as the genre, and it has the gameplay elements you would expect, except it's a top-down game. And it blends in elements from others with options all over the place. To top it off, you don't play as a single character throughout the game, but as 5. And what decisions you make can affect the world of your next character, and you can even recruit your past self to the cause. It feels like picking any one thing to define it isn't really doing it justice. And if you do pick a feature out to dig into, you can't get very far. But it is ambitious and has enough cool features and ideas to make it worth talking about. Plus, there are all the mods you can access through the main menu, like the first-person one. This was made by one of the game's developers, so I also think it's worth a look. So as for the story setup, we're dealing with
so the first person thing is specifically a mod. I thought you can like switch between those perspectives, and I was like, how the fuck does any of this work?
5 main characters. You play one character's story, and then move on to the next. There's no switching back or bouncing around between them. Thankfully, that means we start simple.
Play your cards right, and coming out here could be the best thing that ever happened to you. If you can survive, that is. Because here's the thing. This ain't quite the Wild West as you know it. There are ancient powers at war with each other.
The setup to the world is vague and basically amounts to being the Weird West is weird. Even the name alone seems like a strange choice. Weird West is just a term for a genre mashup. You take a western and combine it with something more fantastical like supernatural horror or sci-fi. You know, something like Jonah Hex from Weird Western Tales. Or Deadlands. Or even... oh man. It would be like if Fallout was called pulp sci-fi. Though funny enough, that game's also on the list of inspirations here. But I will say that the more I played it, the more this title made sense to me. For now, you see a monster sending a bison into orbit, some kind of machete murderer pigman, a werewolf. This is all promising. And the story kicks off from here. What appears to be a cult is ritualistically branding one of its members. It's not clear how this goes as we're brought to our first character waking up screaming from the brand appearing on them. Outside, her son is murdered and her husband kidnapped by a local gang called the Stillwaters. Fairly bad morning so far. Well, this is Jane Bell, formerly retired bounty hunter, now back on the job to take revenge and rescue her husband. Or
Yo, really reminds me of the protagonist of fucking Red Dead Redemption. John Marston, holy fuck, when I speak to you, in my dear audience, in English, there is something fucking wrong with me. Like, I played Red Dead Redemption 2 to death. I know those characters. I know what they are called. I know what they look like. But when I try to... and I obviously play games in English, I don't play games in Polish or anything. But when I try to externalize those thoughts, speak them out loud, something suddenly breaks down. It's so weird, man. Like, I shouldn't have a problem talking about those names and those events and those games. Yet here we are. I don't know how this happens. What I wanted to say basically reminds me of John Marston and his story in Red Dead Redemption 1.
Fuck around in the yard and use her son's bones to club coyotes. Regardless, the Stillwaters also attack the local town of Grackle. They'll also be happy to see the Stillwaters laid to waste. Heading out to settle a score is about as western as it gets, so that's all I'll say about the story for now. You are seeing her family for the first time in the exact same moment it's being downsized, so I didn't feel that invested. But on a gameplay front, the moment you're set free, there is so much to interact with. It does pass the classic can you stack things up to reach a higher location test, but then you could bring a bucket to a pump and fill it with water, knock it over and spill it, come back as someone else and Molotov the chickens. The meat will cook right off the bone, instant tendies. Just be careful with fire, since in the right conditions, that can spread out of control. If the perspective alone gave doubts on what this game is, those go away real fast. Weird West has all kinds of systems going for it, and sometimes they interact in magical ways. Now that you're more up to speed on what this is all about, let's talk about the graphics. Going for a stylized, kind of comic book look is a good idea for their perspective and a nice throwback to Weird West as a concept. With this style, small items like coins and potions are able to pop out more. Because you do have your container interfaces that you can pilfer through like a lot of other games, but here items are frequently interactable objects in the world. They only highlight if you get close, there's no highlight everything option. Some RPGs have that since there are only a few pickups and interactables on screen at a time. Here, it's so dense it would be unreadable. It also makes a lot of other good uses of color contrast, since for most of the game you will be running around through the desert, but then you'll come across deep blues or purples or something else that strikes out at your eyes. It can get fantastical at points, but they keep the rest of the setting grounded enough looking that it doesn't get too wacky. Which is a hard balance when they have the old saloon and the temple to the ancient ones that close, but I think they were great at pulling that off. It's the Old West, sometimes the supernatural pops up, and you just gotta deal with it. I also dig the somber 1800s character portraits they have for everyone, and then they'll put the same kind of expression on a werewolf or a big pig man. I give the game a lot of credit for its jokes not being, look how silly our setting is, which is what writers do when they're embarrassed or insecure about their world. A lot of the humor here is in the mundane little details. When you play as a pigman, the repeated joke isn't, oh my god, a walking pig? Instead it's, wow, you dumb fucks can talk? It embraces the setting for its jokes, and a lot of them are little visual things you can miss. Everyone calls the Stillwaters dumb inbred hillbillies, but how stupid can they? Oh, Jesus Christ. Anyways, the game is complemented by nice lighting and shadows. There's some interesting art direction, and there are points where the game's style does make it look pretty rough. Overall though, the game looks good and fitting. No big issues there. As for the sound design, there are some strong highlights. In combat, using guns especially sounds great.
Okay, something I don't vibe with right away is like seeing level 65 2-star Pigman Ravager. When I see something like that, I immediately associate with RPGs that use like levels as a crutch of sorts, especially when you see the enemy level like on his portrait. I will always like go back to Fallout New Vegas as an example of how you perfectly do an RPG. You get an idea of how strong a certain animal or a type of enemy is by getting fucking demolished by it at certain levels, and then you go, okay, if I have a weapon, if I have a little bit of a better weapon, I can cripple the creature's legs, and even though it's still tanky, I can take it down. Or at certain point, like, you feel you grew to the level of that animal and you can take it on. But it doesn't feel like you leveled up. It feels like you really became this grizzled adventurer. On the other hand, you have something like The Witcher 3, which, if an enemy is 3 levels higher than you, he gets a skull icon, and the game artificially boosts his fucking stupid ass HP by like magnitude of 900%, and he two-shots you, and you will almost never win a fight with an enemy that has a skull icon next to it, and the only way to beat that guy is to go and level up. So that association is so strong, like, that I have a literal, like I said, visceral reaction to seeing it on my screen. But hopefully it's a lot more, like, better thought out in this game. I guess we will see in the gameplay mechanics section.
Some strong highlights. In combat, using guns especially sounds great. If you let a gunshot hang for a moment, you can hear it echoing for miles around you. Then you get a proper gunfight. Beyond how bright and clear the gunshots are, the combat can start sounding very surreal at points. Sometimes a kill means hearing a distorted, echoed scream. It's like hearing their soul ripped away.
I gotta say, I'm really not a fan of this perspective. But that one is obviously just me and my preference. Like, I almost wish it was in first person instead of this. But at the same time, we have so many like first-person games. I think people who prefer this type of view, they deserve some delicious food on their plate too. So it's good to see like a product actually look visibly very different than what you're used to.
This kind of feeling gets amplified by the soundtrack. You do get the music you would expect from westerns sometimes, like guitar flourishes or moody chords. Then you'll get tracks that are droning and ambient, and the guitar kind of creeps in.
Oh man, the shooting almost felt like it was part of the beat there. Holy. It fits so well, what the fuck?
But above everything else, I would call this an electronic soundtrack. The combat music can have this pulsing alarm feeling to it. You can't beat this game without killing any people, so it's like the soundtrack going, "Violence is a gruesome thing. Behold your sins." You get harsh, noisy sounds, and then it turns around and goes, you know what? Guns are hype sometimes. This time the fight will sound straight out of Samurai Jack. But no matter how hard they crank the percussion or twist things around, that little western element is always in there. So you end up with a really unique soundtrack, and for bonus points, some are by the game director's own band. This dude made Arx Fatalis.
Oh, that's...
The sound is carrying a lot of the surrealness. There aren't a ton of ambient
really
sound
cool.
effects, but you might start hearing some electric buzzing, or the sounds of a monster's stalking footsteps are just percussion. As for voice acting, it's all garbled, vaguely language-sounding noise, kind of like Paratopic, but a little more pitched, like a Foogly answering machine. The only person with a voice is a folksy narrator.
That trapper, he wasn't right. Sick with that spirit of greed. Best report back to your village. Let them know the trail's hot.
In the end, it does succeed at making an uncanny atmosphere, but it is one that feels more distant and not just due to the perspective. It's not because of the visuals or sound design, because just looking at it, this clip looks great, but there are some issues that compound to make this kind of void I'll talk about later. For now, let's talk about the gameplay, since there's a lot to cover here. From the start, you've got a few difficulties to choose from. They mainly affect combat, but also how you heal. On easier settings, sleeping will heal up your bullet wounds and restore your action points for abilities. When it gets harder, sleeping only restores AP, and you need to heal in the classic MSim way by using bandages and other medicine. And by other medicine, I mean a downright embarrassing mukbang. When food heals you, the world becomes your golden corral. Except that eldritch meat from some kind of desert monster is probably more like actual food than golden corral. If you've never heard of that chain, it has a chocolate trough and a buffet that they expect the golden corral audience to share. They might have gotten rid of this thing in a post-virus world, but the foul creations that the Trailer Park Oppenheimers came up with due to this fucking thing still haunt me. Golden Corral is an animal testing lab fronting as a restaurant. It's the Callisto Protocol. Just stop going there. I got off track, but it is worth bumping up to hard so you don't rest in every bed you see for an easy heal. Plus, characters can have all kinds of creative alternatives to check out. And you get enemies that are slightly more alert and slightly more dangerous. You can save whenever you want outside of combat, so it's not a huge deal unless you want to try an impossible mode. You still have a difficulty selector with this, but only one autosave, and you can only respawn by finding special items. It'll definitely up the tension, but it's not ideal for a first time run. As for the core gameplay, again, there are quite a few options. You can play it as the proper definition of a top-down game, use a free aim system, but the default and what the game is built around are twin-stick shooter controls. When I first picked it up, controlling the game felt awkward for the first hour or so. And looking at the UI on the screen, that seems more built around a controller, so I tried that out. It still wasn't fully clicking, so then I went back to actual clicking, and out of nowhere there was a moment where it all just came together. The active aiming, shooting, and dodging is solid. Every character also has a Max Payne or John Woo stranglehold dive they can do, and it does deplete your action points.
Okay, now we are talking.
But it feels natural to control. Every character is capable of flying across the screen, wiping some dudes out, and rolling into cover. What counts as cover is something you need to eyeball. There's no lock into the wall system or something like that. It would go against the gameplay freedom they're going for, but there are times where you feel like you're safe and you're still open to gunfire. Then sometimes the opposite can happen. My pig bro stuns out a bandito, but his friend's running up, so I move into cover. I seemed taller than the boxes and was convinced he might get me, but the system is fluid enough that if you get up on an object, you will crouch down lower. It can feel awkward at points, but overall it's pretty solid. But there is an element that's awkward and one that's downright bad. As you explore the game, you'll find nymph relics. The nymphs were ancient, mysterious gremlin beings that you don't learn much about. An impossible mode, appropriately, has some bonus stuff related to them, but not enough to make something compelling. Whatever they were, the relics have mystical properties. By acquiring as many as you can through any means necessary, you can unlock abilities for your characters. To name a few, the bounty hunter can get a shrapnel mine and a mega kick, which work great together. The pigman has a melee charge and can leave a trail of toxic sludge behind him. Across
Fucking singed from League of Legends, what the hell?
Rivers is a hunter who can summon spirit bears and tornadoes. Desiderio Rios receives elemental powers from his gods and is a part-time werewolf. Finally, you have Constance Driftwood of the mysterious Onirist organization. The Onirists see the future and try to guide the West into the best one. It's like if the Bene Gesserit were formed in the same zip code as a Buc-ee's. So she can teleport a short distance and has other forms of outright magic. Sounds good so far, but for spending a little extra, you can unlock weapon abilities for every character. And unlike some other games, this one balances it well. You'll easily find enough relics to unlock all of your character abilities, and anything after that can go right into the weapons. The awkwardness comes from the sheer amount and how you use them. You have 5 types of mainline weapons that all have abilities. And that's not counting Molotovs, dynamite, or other kinds of grenades. Your character and weapon abilities use the exact same buttons. When you aim a weapon, it switches over to your weapon abilities, but there's a slight delay before it goes in. You can switch between 2 weapons quickly, but can open up a wheel to access the rest. Now, think of how frantic twin-stick shooter combat can be. And now you have abilities all tied to the same keys with a slight delay that are shifting around constantly. So when you get in a twitch reflex firefight, it is extremely easy to hit the wrong button and do something you didn't want to.
Oh, that sounds a little bit stinky. Like, this is a thing that you absolutely hear about, like, from a review or a video, and you go, oh, that doesn't seem like a big deal, right? That's not a deal breaker or anything. And then you actually play the game and you realize how many times you actually fall victim to design like this. Like, I am playing through, on my own time, I am currently playing through Batman Arkham City. And it's a great game. It has like the Batman fantasy is realized superbly. You have like different gameplay sections so the game never feels too stale. But you have that a little bit of junk, and it's a tiny bit. Sometimes Batman will hit the wrong guy, somebody with a shield or with heavy armor, which instantly breaks your combo. Sometimes you see the icon for a counter, you press the counter button, and for some reason the attack goes through you, and the game doesn't register the attack at all, and Batman does the animation preparing for a counter and you lose your combo. Sometimes you hit the wrong guy, or he doesn't like use his gadget as quickly as you want it to, or he pulls away from danger way too slowly and you die because of that. And that fucking sucks, man. And it doesn't happen every time, but you definitely will come out after playing Arkham City saying, yeah, the experience is not perfect, there is quite a bit of junk there. And that's just a tiny portion of it. So yeah, I can definitely imagine this getting in the way of my fun. Definitely.
You have to slow for a moment and look at the action icons to make sure you're not messing up. It might not be as bad if you were only switching between two weapons, but experimenting and adapting are the name of the game. It got better with time, but I never became fully comfortable with it. It's a lot of options, and weapon powers can have utility for something like stealth, but when things heat up, the system mainly adds clunkiness to the flow. And it doesn't help that the John Woo dive is always useful and always reliable. Under pressure, it overshadows cool options just because I know what to expect. When it comes to melee, character powers that use it, like the Pigman charge, are a blast. If you're sneaking, you can knock someone out with your hands or something more blunt, or equip something deadlier. All of that works fine, but the act of equipping and using a melee weapon in a proper fight is absolutely miserable. Because of how the ability system works, you have to aim your melee weapon like it's a firearm. Even when you win a fight that way, there's nothing satisfying about it. It doesn't help when your enemies can frequently avoid these attacks. And sadly, this extends into playing Desi's werewolf form, which I had really been looking forward to. He has elite power, which is fun, but using claws is the same old misery. Trying it out is some of the worst up-close fighting I've had in a twin-stick game. Though as
Man, just add a little bit of stun, of like hit stun to your attacks, so you see the reaction from the enemies and they, like, their current action gets cancelled. And always have your attacks semi locked on or locked in, so like they are more like animations that play out. For a game like this, it's perfect. Like, the type of controls Mandalore is describing seems like they would work for a first-person game with melee options, but for something like this, you need to lock your fucking character into an animation when you hit the attack button, because it feels like way more powerful when you hit somebody with that nice cool looking animation rather than just swing and his just damage is subtracted from his health bar and he doesn't react otherwise.
compensation, Arcane's Dark Messiah Legacy carries on with a dedicated kick button. I guess that sums up the combat in its janky parts, though you could try tactical mode. This flat-out toggles slow-mo on and off, which is better for the ability system, but removes a ton of the challenge, so not perfect. When it comes to the setting itself, there is a good amount of stuff being simulated. The world is similar to Fallout or some other RPGs, where you get to the edge of a location and can travel across an overworld. You break through the fog, and occasionally new locations will be revealed. You'll also have a chance of random encounters like traveling merchants, bandits, animals, and all kinds of other activities. Traveling can be faster, and some bad encounters can be avoided with the help of a horse. You can steal them for a temporary one-way trip, but these are weird West horses. They sometimes call out to gods, and I assume have other opinions, because when you get to a location with a stolen horse, they take off. They're loyal companions here. In real life, they're more like walking couches with a severe anxiety disorder. So buying a horse lets you store more items and see the map properly, instead of poor and unable to travel because someone needs to feed your couch. As you play different characters, new locations can open up, or existing ones can change hands. How the world evolves can be based on your choices. Going back to Jane the Bounty Hunter, you could rescue your husband without dealing with the Stillwater leader, or killing any of them, which for later characters can mean the Stillwaters are still a present threat that show up in different locations. You do have the big decisions and dialogue that change the landscape, but the world is reactive in a way that most RPGs don't have. Like, you have your fairly standard crime and reputation system. You can become wanted and bounty hunters try to catch you, but there are different degrees in how areas might react to you. You could also single-handedly ride into town and massacre the population to the point it becomes a ghost town that's completely abandoned when you next come by. Something else might move in between characters. An area can go from a criminal hideout, to a monster lair, to a slaver base, to a thriving compound with a delivery quest for you, all in the same campaign. Which is cool to see, and this kind of stuff hits harder when it's the result of your actions. But the quest you get is MMO tier, go get this object, and while there can be some big changes and good character moments based on your actions, a lot of it does amount to set dressing. It also doesn't help when the locations start becoming repetitive. And I don't mean like clearly seeing the same assets rearranged, which does happen, but I mean being unlucky with bounty missions and being sent to Yeb's prize over and over again. The money was good, but I was so sick of the layout. I was thrilled to get a new location, which was basically just Yeb's prize again. This didn't happen on a following playthrough, so it was bad luck, but you are going to see repeated locations no matter what. There's also the fact that unlike Arcanum or Fallout or whatever, you're playing 5 characters. The best and most engaging part of exploring this way is the shifting perspective. What seemed odd as one character can suddenly make sense, or something you missed is suddenly very visible. The downside is, you're free to visit areas meant for other characters. Sometimes you come to a unique, interesting location and there is stuff for you to do there, and other times you're just getting a peek at it before someone else's journey. Or outright robbing their starting location, which is fun, but it can make the open exploration feel frustrating. They'll throw in items like perk cards to find, which are a second set of upgrades that pass through all your characters. These are all more passive, but do change up how you play the game, but these and Nymph relics aren't guaranteed, and they don't feel that rewarding. But I was exploring because there were missions and things to find that were extremely good. To give a minor example, 2 of them were worried something bad was happening in their town. There were a few people suspected of being behind it, but nothing concrete. You can investigate them, or you might know what the kids are describing and look for different clues, and then figure out how you proceed from there. There are good side stories like that, and also the repetitive go get my pants quests. And even the more engaging side content doesn't go too far into the characters. I mean, just looking at it, it seems like an RPG that would have all these side stories and weirdos, but the farther you go off the main path, the more it feels like panning for gold and getting teeth. It can remind me more of playing Mountain Blade over Fallout. It's more of a sandbox, which is great news if you do like all the systems. But it also feels like it's at war with itself sometimes. But before I get into that, there are a lot of great moment-to-moment features. So many that I'm sure I didn't notice some. The sheer volume of little reactivity things are impressive, but some are more highlighted. Like if someone dies in a town, they'll get their own grave plot and you can squeeze that market. There might also be nice shinies in those holes. NPCs can form relationships like marrying each other, and if you kill one of their family members, they might go on a vendetta. And you can encounter them later in your story, or another character's story if you bring them along. There's also an opposite effect where if you help someone out, they might become a friend for life. When you're losing a fight, they'll show up to help, but you can also still find them around in the world somewhere. And these relationships are tied to individual characters who can die like anyone else. Your past lives are also capable of dying, and you can beat the game killing just about everybody. Most mainline missions have several ways of accomplishing them, and breaking that down even further, you can do it in all kinds of ways with the interactivity. You get in a gunfight and someone shoots a lamp that spills oil everywhere and ignites, and then that heat turns the boxes of 44 into Jiffy Pop. There's tons of room to experiment, and having multiple characters does give you extra room there. You could play everyone as purely good or evil, but mixing it up gives you more to appreciate. The bounty hunter could be good, and you can make the pigman good too on the long hard road to redemption. Or have him emulate Brazil's deadliest black hat, Django Bravo. At times it could seem like he's struggling to make it to the next scene, and that's very in line with the pigman.
Esse pastel é de hoje?
Não, senhor, é de carne.
Ninguém debocha Django Bravo.
Fuck is that movie?
You can shoot everyone in the face and not break the story, and that's worth trying.
Mas tomou cunhaque?
Ninguém debocha Django Bravo.
Every time I've launched this game, I've found little fun details every time. Without a doubt, Weird West has earned the funny number, but it's where the other genres push in harder that it hurts itself. As a sandbox, you can set up camp wherever you want, hunt and skin animals, and sell the meat on the market, or cook the meat, or make items out of it, or wait until nightfall and break into shops and rob them blind. Then you have the more RPG side of the game, like party members. They still have those dynamic elements, like interacting with objects around them, but with their presence, you can actually feel the genre shifting over. Whether you're recruiting brand new buddies or your past characters, all followers work exactly the same. It is a good idea just to interact with your past self once to have money and other items transfer over. But if you bring them along for the ride, they'll fight alongside you and use their abilities in combat. These can make the fights wild, like Across Rivers gets good at putting people beneath ground when he uses that tornado. The main issue is that they wanted followers to be helpful but not intrusive at the same time. For convenience, when you're sneaking, the AI is not supposed to be able to see your followers. This bugs out and happens anyways sometimes, but usually they'll run all over the map and no one notices them. Which looks awkward when everything is supposed to be so simulated, but when combat does break out, they'll sometimes charge right into the head of it and the fighting becomes headless chickens. It makes the game way easier, but also plays more mindlessly. If that's the case, you think you might just want to dismiss them, but then you miss out on extra inventory space, all the party banter, the unique encounters and interactions that you would expect from a classic RPG. But you don't have that level of control. You can't switch between characters or order their attacks. Just the act of equipping them compared to equipping yourself is so clunky and awkward. But the game will drop valuable items for you in about the amount of an RPG. The itemization and effects of them are actually very meaningful and balanced. There's just so much actual stuff you get. Weird West's biggest issue is that features are good in a vacuum or synergize with a few other things. But stuff like this lacks cohesion to the point that it's ripping itself in half. Do you want an immersive sandbox that's more barren on character moments, but you're in the center? You'll pull off all kinds of shenanigans. Or do you want that RPG experience which has more character moments and humanity, but it's also clunky and barely surface level since they should be doing their own thing as an immersive sim? And there are so many other tools and interactions that I won't go into detail here on. Because the core issue doesn't change, these are just more details. I'm sorry if this feels more all over the place than usual, but it's very reflective of the game. It has so much going on that it's genuinely hard to describe easily. I feel so lost. To complete the frustration, it is a buggy game. And while there wasn't anything game-breaking, some moments got close. It's a lot more polished than it used to be, and some are just visual or are fixed on a load, but it is noticeable. And there are details in games you take for granted that might not show up here. You don't always have transition animations between states, which is fine. It can be an issue when you're trying to sneak, and enemies only have it on some idle animations. You see it in the wild enough, but it feels very different when you get caught by it. And I wouldn't say the jank is biased against you because it works in your favor too. And hey, on the day I recorded this, I discovered if you knock someone out in their bed, it won't alert guards because they figure they're sleeping. I have to stop. The first person mod is interesting in that aspect because their attention to detail was so high that even in this state, it does work. It is even jankier here, after all it's not officially supported, but as far as creating an interactable world goes, they completely succeeded. It's just that these other elements were pulling away from its core, but that was the experiment. So much is wonderful and so much is disjointed, and that leaves me with the story and world. Beyond the exploration issues, playing in a world full of variables with 5 characters where near anyone can die means that it's hard.
I wonder how good like the first person mode actually is for you to play the sorta like the entire game, because I look at this game, I look at this perspective, listen to some of those problems Mandalore is talking about, and I'm not even slightly interested in this game, even though I love me some Wild West settings, you know, especially when you mix it with something very weird like zombies, like fucking werewolves, vampires. I am all about that. But like the gameplay, I don't know about this gameplay. Like it doesn't, like to me personally, obviously, it doesn't seem all that fun. But maybe in that first person, like things could be better like for me. So I guess I would have to like look up how this actually plays in first person mode before trying this for myself.
Hard to get something that narratively interesting out of it, at least when it comes to the characters. Jane's family is gone right as we're learning how to play. It's the same with the other characters, where you're dropped into a struggle in their lives, complete it, and then move on. My favorite journey was the Pigman because he also has proper amnesia and doesn't know why he's a pigman. And I know that amnesia is the khaki pants of game stories, but his experience gives you more of the stranger in a strange land feeling that this game probably should have leaned into more. And thematically, it ties into the main story a lot more directly. I thought Weird West was an appropriate title because of how blunt it is. It's a take it for what it is approach that doesn't have much obviously interesting happening for most of the game. While there are some creepy monsters and ideas, there's not enough unique to really latch onto in the setting. For the most part, you're told very little about it, and since the characters are so vague too, you have very little to connect to. It's a shame because when conversations are happening, they're good, but you've mostly been dropped into the middle of things. The strongest are the people you encounter in every form, like Essex Mass, the man searching for immortality, and Heathen, a mysterious witch who seems to know you're the same person. And it's not that the others are bad, I really liked Pigman Joe and Sheriff Albright, but right when they're getting interesting, you've already moved on. It's like playing a role-playing game, and right when you learn some secret or nuance about one of your companions, you can't talk to them anymore. The game is about getting window glimpses into the struggles and cultures of people all across the West. And this part isn't a mistake, it's the whole point. I get what they're going for, and it actually reminds me a lot of Arx Fatalis, but it's something that I think sounds more interesting described than to actually play. I'll be brief, but if you don't want spoilers, go to here.
That is very brief, a minute and a half.
The main mystery is
Holy.
about why all these characters are connected by the brand and what was happening in that cult room. Well, Essex Mass believes he can get immortality by stealing it from an immortal. There's a mysterious figure named Aleph who has somehow been weakened, and Essex thinks that he can steal his powers. He also thinks the brand on you has something to do with body possession. That alone is enough to put a lot of it together, it's more how and why. Beyond the gameplay, the plot itself is also an experiment. 4,000 years ago, a group called the 21 discovered a wishing tome with only 2 wishes left. Aleph wished for all of them to be immortal, but as the ages passed, they realized that being immortal is horrible. They were far beyond their humanity at this point, and when they wished it reversed, the book refused. So Aleph learned enough about magic to launch an experiment. He would possess 5 struggling people in the West, and living through their lives, would possibly regain his humanity and his mortality. If it fails, the 21 will use the last wish to destroy the universe, since they figure that'll kill them off. There's no final showdown or grand finale, it's a quiz. The 21 will ask you about your actions and why you made them, and how you answer determines the fate of the universe. If you have humanity behind your answers, the plan works, they all consume you and die. And you get a cutscene showing how all of your actions affected the world. Answer like a robot and the universe dies. Even other characters remark on how anticlimactic everything is. The individual stories can have their moments, and Essex can get a payoff too. But because my connection to the world and characters was distant due to this approach, I didn't feel invested. Weird West feels like an experiment from genre veterans, and some results are promising, and others feel like splashing acid on my arm. I wish it had more meaningful side stories and opportunities to know the characters better, because there is a ton of fun stuff here, but it's rotating around an orb of emptiness I can't quite define. Overall, I liked it. I convinced the Goblins to knock it 65% off in the pinned link, and you can get it for free on Game Pass and probably other stuff like that. Especially if you like Sims or sandbox games, it's definitely worth a look. I was surprised at how good some parts of the game were, and how much it clashed with itself. There's so much ambition and so much to appreciate that I wish I could say it was amazing and just scream its praises, but it's just too all over the place. Wolfeye is worth supporting, and they're working on a new game, which I'm extremely interested to see. So check it out if you know what you're getting into. Because there was no bison hunting monster that sent them into orbit, only I went into orbit.
Fica ligado, não tenho medo de você.
Ninguém debocha Jango Bravo.
Yeah, this doesn't really seem like a title I would be interested in.
Originals aren't going anywhere. The real question is, why didn't they make Pathways into Darkness the extraction shooter? That would be perfect. Bungie, please do something with Pathways into
Oh, is he talking about Marathon?
But the trilogy's story was done, and done so beautifully. Actual campaign game. Checked it out and you like fighting games? You should, because
Okay,
it's
I
wild.
actually
Thoughts
wanna...
on the new Marathon game? Well, it is an extraction shooter, and like everyone else, I would have liked to see an actual campaign from Bungie again. But the trilogy's story was done, and done so beautifully that you could only do a reboot or a spin-off. I am condensing because I could go on for a while, but overall, I'm happy people are talking about Marathon. And if it is a horror show, the originals aren't going anywhere. The real question is, why didn't they make Pathways into Darkness the extraction shooter? That would be perfect. Bungie, please do something with
Holy shit, yeah, that's a great idea, actually. But I guess Marathon also has some of like those locations and stories that you can turn into like recovering alien tech from, you know, like crashed ships or like bases of any of like the factions mentioned in Marathon. Unless it's a complete reboot that like turns its back on all of the story. There's also no telling like how story heavy it will be. Like this point it's a guessing game if like even the title will amount to anything or not. And yeah, when it comes to Weird West, looks kinda cool, but it's definitely not a game for me, I'm afraid. I love the presentation though. It looks clean as all hell, man. And yeah, that's pretty much it for Weird West review by MandaloreGaming. Just a simple little look at an interesting game. Let's see if there's anything interesting going on in the comments. I love how in this game if you keep robbing stores they go out of business, and there's dozens of people online who are asking why stores are going out of business when they keep robbing them through poetry.